Now, since all classes we said that we create in Dart, they all inherit from a parent class called object. So if you go ahead and let's give a very quick example here. If I say string, right, this is a class, as you can see here, says C, string, but it also is a type. So a class is essentially the same as a type. Okay, we'll talk more about that. And I say name is equal to Bonnie. Okay, and the moment I say name, I say dot, and there's a lot of methods that we can use here. Now let's do this. If I say object as the parent of all classes that we create, let's say object, say it's equal to new object as such. The moment I say object, say dot, there's only a few methods that you can use. Hash code, runtime, and all that. But the most important one, we have this toString method here. What the toString method does, let's go ahead and copy and say that, and let's print that out real quick here. Say print object. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and comment this out, and let's just give it a quick run and see what's going to happen. It says instance of object. So essentially the same thing we got the first time we started learning about classes and so forth. Now, the point that I'm trying to get to here, so if we say that any class that we create, so if we go back to this, any class that we create or any class that exists on Dart library, class libraries, inherits from object. That means then, if we're inheriting from object, it means we get all of the properties and variables, instant variables from object. So that means then, if I have this string here, we notice that object has toString method. That means this, if I go ahead and say this, if I say name dot, look at that, it has also the toString. Makes sense, right? Because we said that since string implicitly inherits all objects, classes inherit from object, that means we should also have string. That's really good. That's very good news, because now what we can do, let me get rid of all of this. If I go back to, let's clean things up. If I go back here, let's say location, and I have, if I go back here, let's say these elevated location, I could have gone to location class, that's fine, but I'm going to use this elevated location. I can actually start typing to, look at that, string, right, as an override, and I can override it to return whatever I want. Why? Again, because elevated location is a class, which in this case extends location, but this location here also actually implicitly extends object. Now, the reason why we don't write extends object to any class that we create is because it is implied that it extends object, because we know all classes extend the object superclass. See? Now, because we are talking about inheritance, of course, if location extends object and elevated location extends location, that means elevated location has also the properties of object, which is why we're able to override, use the toString method, which returns a string, override it if we wish to do so, to return whatever we want. Now here it says return super.toString. Yes, it's returning the super. What is the super? It's going to be our object, super. But we don't want that, right? We want to be able to return something. What we can do now is I can go ahead and say toString, I can say var result, and I can start constructing the string that I want to be called when I call the toString on our elevated location. Is equal to, in fact, I'm going to copy all of the, let's see, lat, longitude, and elevation as such. And instead of returning super to string, I'm just going to return result as such. Now, every time we are using the elevated location, in this case, this is a type of this is the elevated location object. I don't have to go and write all of this, because now I can just go ahead and say print. Well, I can say elevated. Look at this, dot toString. Look at this. Now I can go run, and there we go. The beauty here is that we're taking advantage of inheritance properties, which allows us to override methods from our parents. So any class or object, any class you use in Dart, you can, of course, override the toString method anytime, because all classes that we ever create or classes that exist in the library, Dart library, they do inherit from object, even though it's not explicit, because it's usually like this, right? But we know for sure that this implicitly extends object class, superclass. Okay, so this comes back to that big idea that we've been talking about here. Everything is an object in Dart. Everything. Why? Because everything inherits from object. Okay. But the cool thing also here is very interesting, is because we know this is just an object, which means all object will have this toString, and if we override the toString here, right, and return the result this way. We don't have to go ahead and call the toString. Notice this still works. Obviously, if we run this like we showed, still gives us the result. However, the beauty here is that we don't have to call it if we already override. So if we call just that object, what's going to happen is that because we're overriding this toString, if we're calling the object, it knows right away that we need to call the toString implicitly. Okay, so we don't have to explicitly add the toString to then call the toString, which will give us the result. Look, if we run this, there we go. Very cool. Perfect. I'll see you next.